as the season of Pentecost comes to its conclusion, which really does in a sense today. Next week, technically, we're still in the season of Pentecost, but we'll be celebrating Christ the King Sunday, the last Sunday in the church year. So this is the last Sunday in these appointed lessons of the seasons of Pentecost. And the season of Pentecost is typically that season where we grow in what it means to be disciples of Jesus, followers, and then apostles, those who are sent out in the midst of the world. And so as we come to a conclusion of this season, it feels like we have quite a contrast before us today. We could look at our psalm, Psalm 98, which seems to be filled just with incredible joy. And we get the idea that this psalm likely was written for a time of great joy for the people of Israel. This could have been at thinking about the dedication of the temple. It could have been when David came into Jerusalem with the Ark of the Covenant. It could have been after a significant military victory. Whatever it was, this psalm is just filled with such imagery of incredible joy and what it is that God is accomplishing for the people. And then the contrast of our scripture readings is that we also get to hear from this gospel reading today, which is just filled with great cheer in and of itself, that you will be persecuted, there will be earthquakes and famines, and you'll be hated by your own family, and they might even put some of you to death. And I thought after that, Jesus should have just said, so happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy your time with family in the midst of all of that. Because it seems like such an incredible contrast that we are called to live into, and which one is true for us as we wind down the end of a church year to feel like what are these concluding thoughts that we are to have. And the reality for the people who guide us through this church year, the reality for our own lives is that it is both. We live in this duality of concepts all the time. Actually, just this morning, somebody commented as they walked in, what an incredible, beautiful day we're having here in Denver, Colorado, in the midst of this great fall day, and it feels like fall is all we should be thinking about, and yet, if you walk out the front door and look, we do have some Christmas lights already hung on a few trees because, we're getting ready and we know that that's coming. And it looks like we constantly live in this duality. And even in the midst of joy, we know this as well. The psalmist took time to create the way that we understand the inclusiveness of joy that's going to come our way. As we look at some of these verses, and after we get through those opening verses of shouting for joy and all that it's going to mean, verses 5, 6, 7, and 8 just fill us with this sense of both contrast and inclusiveness at the same time. Listen to all the ways that we are going to sing to the Lord. One, with harp and voice, which is really good. A couple of weeks ago, we had the harp, and we had our choir singing the Requiem, and all of that sounded just glorious together. But then we also have trumpets and the sound of the horn. Now, if you've ever sat down to listen to a harpist play, and then a trumpet play, you realize they're not the same thing. They're a different way of expressing joy, and they have a contrast to them that's truly beautiful as a part of it. He goes on to talk to us about letting the sea roar and the world and everything that fills it. And in people, as they would look at this sense of creation, they would know what that means, that the sea was the place where chaos reigned. And so when we hear this about the sea, we would say that's the part of creation that is completely out of our control. But then the world, the land, has some things that are within our control. But both of them are appropriate to understand as part of God's creation in the midst of the joy that we will have. And then we have the rivers clapping their hands and the hills ringing out. And I actually never have seen the hands of a river yet as they come, but I can just imagine the psalmist has this idea of seeing kind of a river rushing down a canyon, and there'll be a rock in the middle of it, and that's where the water will hit that rock and just sort of take off for a while and jump into the air. And I get the idea, the psalmist has this idea that that's the very river clapping his hands as it set free and then rejoins the rush of the river again. And then the hills ringing out with joy. Well, it's probably no great wonder why the Sound of Music starts the way it does, for us to understand the joy that comes with understanding that the hills themselves have a song. And so in the midst of the contrast that we see in those things, we also see the completeness of God, everything it is that needs to be accomplished for us to understand great joy. And that is a part of realizing what God has in store for us. And then Jesus comes along as they're talking about the temple and the stones that adorn it. And I have to admit, as I read that, I was thinking, why are the disciples so excited about the temple being adorned with stones? Isn't this really rather common? But then I realized this is Jesus and disciples, and they've been traveling around, spending a lot of their time in Galilee and some in Samaria, and they've traveled around. It's not like they're in Jerusalem all the time. And I have to think about the times that my family has traveled, and we had an experience where we ended up in Montreal and thought, we have like 90 minutes. Let's just sort of see what there is to see in Montreal. Everybody try to do Montreal in 90 minutes. It's really hard to do, just so you know. You should probably plan a day if you're thinking about it sometime. But we happened to be there, and somebody said, are you going to go see the Basilica? I have to admit, we hadn't looked up anything about Montreal. We didn't know there was one there. So we just thought, we'll wander down the street, and we walked in, and we did not at all look like tourists. When we walked into the Basilica in Montreal and went at all the incredible beauty that was there waiting for us. We had no idea. And I wonder even if it's that way for Jesus and his disciples, just to be captured by the grandeur of the temple. It had to be quite different from the synagogue they experience in Capernaum as they're walking through that little town. And so when you see that, you can't help but think about it. And also the reality that for them in that day, the temple stood as a place of the very presence and the promise of God that came through all of that. So to be captured by the beauty of the temple and to think about the long-standing tradition that it's had and the promise of God's eternal promise connected to it, to hear now Jesus say that all these stones are going to be thrown down, that nothing of it will last. All of a sudden, the disciples now are questioning everything about what it means for them to be following Jesus. And then Jesus has to come and bolster them and let them know that everything that they're going to experience and everything that the world is going to experience won't always be the end. These will be but marks along the way. So the common themes of the day, the famines and the earthquakes, but then also knowing that they themselves are going to be persecuted for what they believe and how they believe. And to be able to have the endurance to get through all of that makes a difference. And so Jesus comes to share with them that they are not to prepare their defense in advance. Now, I know that seems really challenging. I mean, I kind of think I'd want to walk around with like a 3x5 card in my back pocket all the time, just in case all of a sudden I was put on the spot. I could take that out and I've got 3 talking points, and I know exactly what I'm going to say to put my opponents to shame in all of this. And Jesus said that's not how it's going to work. Don't work on just putting together talking points. Just live in faith. And when you live in that faith, you will find that the relationship that you have with God, the relationship that you have with Jesus is enough for any given time. It's that relationship, when it is strong enough, that will carry you through any adversity that is to come. And that might even take us back to the psalm a little bit. Because when we heard in that psalm, the opening and closing talk about God revealing the righteousness of God in the sight of the nations, and the Lord will judge the world with righteousness. And that doesn't depend on how good we are, but how much God desires to have a relationship with us. That's the great judge, is how deep of a relationship do you feel with God? Sometimes that means that you are going to feel like shouting with joy, that you're going to feel like a river clapping its hands, and sometimes it's going to feel like you are being persecuted and that everything is turning against you. But in the midst of that, your relationship with God will bring endurance. That's Jesus' final word to us in the end of this passage as he's talking about these things that could happen, but by your endurance you will gain your souls. And the rest of it will feel like it just came along for the ride. It's just a part of what it means to live throughout your life, experiencing every human emotion that could be imaginable, the inclusiveness of creation that comes together in a relationship with God. That might be the final word that we really want to hear, is that God will care for us through it all, that God will provide for us through it all, and that God simply wants us to be people of faith. And then when it comes time to speak, we'll find the words to speak, because the faith that's in us will just come out of us. When it's time to testify, we will simply testify, because we'll have all of the words and the images, and they'll just be within us. And when the time comes when life challenges seem to be so much that they might overcome us, we'll find a store of strength, because God will be with us. And it won't be made known through a temple. It won't be made known through a doctrine. It won't be made known through 3 talking points on a 3x5 card. It's simply going to be within us. It will rest within our own souls. And it's in that place. It's in that place of a relationship with God that somehow everything will be managed. Joy? Oh yeah, it'll come. It'll come in bushelfuls. Challenge? Oh yeah, they're going to be there almost just as much. And faith? Yeah, faith. That will be a part of it all. Amen.